You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
A mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, we've got a great program coming up. This was the program we originally had scheduled for last week, and we have right now I've got Alex Newman and Debbie Boscalupi. Alex and Debbie are both very, very good friends, but they are two of the most incredible people, and they've been following COP25. They were over in Madrid, and they were there when COP25 was going on. They've got a lot to report. We've got some videos. We've got some clips that are going to be coming up with that. I see Alex is on the call right now. I'm not sure if Debbie's made it yet, but Alex, welcome to the radio show. And I look forward to hearing what your take on COP25 was. So we might as well get started with that. I called the program Losers and Fanatics on Display. And I would say that's probably about as close as we could get to the truth on that. So, Alex, please tell us what you saw at COP25.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me on the program, Dan. It's great to be with you. It's great to see you. And the COP25, actually, right before we started, I was writing up my major report on it, which will be a cover story in the New American coming soon. And there's just so much to talk about. I'm sure Debbie has a little bit of a different vantage point, but she was also over there with our team for the New American magazine. And then we had Brennan, who was with us doing a lot of the camera and video editing work. And, I think probably the best description that I heard the entire time that I was there came from Trump's climate advisor. I know you met him personally. He was one of the speakers at the Inconvenient Lie Summit that we had in Phoenix, Arizona a few years ago, shortly before he became President Trump's official climate advisor. That was Dr. William Happer, his professor from Princeton. And so he did not actually go to the UN summit itself, but he did go to something called the Climate Reality Conference that was held in Madrid at the same time as the UN COP25. And the way he put it was like this. He said, we are dealing here with a dangerous, bizarre environmental cult, and we're all here under false pretenses. And I think, to describe the summit in just one short sentence, that was perfect. I mean, it had all the trappings of a cult movement. You had leaders deceiving the faithful. You had, things that were borrowed from true religion and incorporated into their false religion. The old, everybody feels guilty, right? Because everybody's a sinner. And so you had this constant play off on this. You're all climate sinners. You've all sinned against Mother Nature. You all have a carbon footprint, and so you must repent. And the fact that you're here, that's a good start. You can pay the UN, your indulgences to maybe absolve you of your climate sins. But it really had the feeling of a cult. And as Dr. Happer and so many other eminent scientists have pointed out, people like Richard Lindzen at MIT, people like Roy Spencer at the University of Alabama at Huntsville, who used to be the senior climatologist at NASA, these people have all pointed out that this has now become a religious cult type movement. And it's a very dangerous cult. And this became crystal clear being at the UN COP25, because we were hearing in person the kinds of policies these people were advocating. So Dr. Roy Spencer, climatologist from NASA, who now runs the satellite data set at the University of Alabama at Huntsville, he calls these people climate Nazis because the policies they're advocating would end up exterminating millions of people, primarily people in Africa, people in Asia, people in Latin America, who are already so poor. They don't even have food to cook. And if they do have food, they're cooking it on dung in their mud hut. The policies that these people are advocating would impoverish them even more. And they don't have any margin left. You make them any poorer and they're going to die. And so he says these people are dangerous, and they are. And when you go there and you hear this stuff, Dan, it just blows your mind. We got it all on tape because we couldn't expect people to believe that this stuff was happening, that it was being funded with our tax dollars. But you had people calling for radical depopulation of the planet openly, from UN stages, from the most prominent stages in the venue, saying we need to get rid of all these people on the planet. There's way too many people. We need to stop consuming. We need to get rid of fossil fuels. We need to ban cows. This is absolute insanity. And if these people get their way, it really will result in an absolute tragedy for millions, if not billions of people. Americans are wealthy enough that we could probably withstand some very significant reduction in our standard of living, and we would still survive. It would be uncomfortable. We wouldn't have, the nice things that we've become used to, but we would probably still have food and things like that. But when you're dealing with people on the edge of survival, pushing them over the edge really would have catastrophic consequences. And so, I think these scientists hit the nail on the head. We're dealing with a dangerous cult here. These people have to be stopped. If they aren't stopped, the consequences for the poor and for humanity as a whole are going to be devastating.
Mm-hmm. No, you're absolutely spot on with that, Alex. And Paul Dreesen just wrote a recent article about that, but he wrote the book Eco-Imperialism, about exactly what they were trying to do, the environmental movement was trying to do, to restrict or completely destroy third world nations from having the ability to move into modern society and to have the things that we have. And, it's amazing to me, but this is just the same old rehash of communism that we've had for the last 100 years, 100 plus years, and it hasn't changed a bit, except the people who are promoting it now are promoting it as sustainable development, but it's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing.
It absolutely is, Dan. And, I think that's why the term watermelons, which I did not coin, but it's so perfectly appropriate. They are green on the outside. They realize that revolution of the proletariat wasn't exactly selling well. And there's Debbie. Hey, Debbie. And so now they've shifted over to, calling it green. They just put a green packaging around the same old red tyranny. And this was really obvious at the summit. You had the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, an actual socialist. This guy was the leader of the Socialist International before becoming the head of the UN, the world's leading alliance of Marxists, communists, mass murderers, butchers, etc. Millions of innocent people murdered by the political parties that are members of this thing. And he stands up at the climate summit and says, we need a global carbon tax so that we can finance a total transformation of society. And if you look, when they're talking about this total transformation of society, what you realize is they are talking about drastic restrictions on individual liberty, central planning of the economy, government control over production and consumption. This is all communism, formed over communism, just with a new outer packaging, and it's very dangerous. And I'm sure Debbie has some insights into this too, because she saw a lot of the same stuff that I saw, and she saw a lot of stuff that I didn't see because there's so much going on there. So, hey, Debbie, good to see you.
Debbie, how are you? Happy New Year. I know you had a Merry Christmas, but you're in Jackson Hole right now, right? Oh, you're muted, dear. You need to unmute yourself.
All right. Can you hear me now?
5 by 5.
Can you hear me now?
Great to see you. Yes, we can. Great to see you, Debbie.
Yes, we are in Jackson Hole today, and actually for the week skiing. Haven't gotten out on the cold slopes yet. But, you know, here in Jackson Hole, there is no sign of global warming. So, you know, I love it.
I'm jealous, Debbie. I'm very jealous.
Thank you, Randy. We saw Sandra Bullock yesterday. And apparently she doesn't believe in the global warming hoax either, because she's here to ski with her family.
Well, Debbie, it's great to see you. We're going to have a fantastic 2 hours here because you got so much information, and I saw some of the videos that you guys took while you were over there. Man, this is just great information for people to realize just exactly what a bunch of sadistic, pathetic individuals these people are. I mean, it is all about communism. It is all about collectivism and their new world order, and they can package it any way they want. But the reality is that they don't give two hoots about the environment. They care about controlling us and everything we do. So let's hear your opinion about the whole collection of nincompoops that was over in Madrid.
I kind of like that terminology there. And if I'm slow here, let me know, like wave your hands if, you know, I've got a slow stream here. But what I noticed, the overall message was, I was there for 2 weeks. I was there the day the conference started, and I was there the day the conference ended. And it's a 2-week conference, the COP conferences are. And what I noticed, the overall message theme was vote. Every presentation, almost every presentation that I decided to attend, whether it be a press conference with the depopulationist or a press conference with Nancy Pelosi and crew in tow on the very first day of the conference, the theme to me was get the young people and get the young people to vote. We need to vote out people like Donald Trump, and we need to vote in. Remember, okay, so I've been thinking about this. If you listen to Al Gore's message, it is you have to have the political will, right, Alex? He always says we need to have the political will. And so what does that mean? It means politically, we need to change. We need to vote in regulations. We need to vote in fines. We need to vote in any way to curb the so-called the climate, right? And so this is why I believe their overall message was, I don't think they knew that this was going to be a successful conference. It was not. It was a failure. But as one person put it, Mark Morano put it, this was just a placeholder for COP26, which is supposed to be a huge conference because it's going to be huge because it is the conference that either says the United States is in the Paris Agreement or we're out. So there, I guarantee you guys, I promise you, the message over the next year until the 2020 U.S. presidential election is to get as many people, young people who believe in climate change, out to vote for the United States presidential election and in Congress and all of that. So I think it's going to be a year heavy indoctrination of getting out the vote. So that's my overall feeling of the conference.
You know, Debbie, it's amazing to me that Democrats, they want you to be 21 years old to buy a gun. But they'd like to see 6-year-olds vote because they're getting younger and younger people indoctrinated into this complete nonsense, aren't they?
Yeah. And, when I was running against Jackie Speer, congressional candidate Jackie Speer, congressional Congresswoman Jackie Speer, I was a congressional candidate in 2012. She had been stating that she wanted 16-year-olds to vote. So that has been a long-standing message of the Democrat Party is, to get the youth. Well, Hitler said he alone who owns the youth gains the future. And so just seeing the amount of young people, Dan, Alex and I both notice year over year, bigger and bigger crowds of young people at these conferences. They give these young people a pass to disrupt the conference, where if you and I disrupted the way these kids do, we would be kicked out of the United Nations conferences. We would have to take a special training to get our way back into the conference and be accepted once again. But they get a pass for being disruptive, for being, they're rude, they're righteous. These young people are. They're know-it-alls. They were pushy. They were. It was just extraordinary to me the way that they treat adults. I witnessed this during the climate change march. This was right before Alex and CFAC got to the conference. I was part of the huge march in Madrid, and they estimate 500,000 people. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but I would not be a bit surprised if it were, 100,000 people at this march. But the kids were pushy. They were aggressive. They were know-it-alls. And it's extraordinary to me that those are the people, that's the generation who's going to be taking care of me when I'm older. And I'm like, whoa, I don't know who these kids think they are, but they're being taught that they can get away with anything. They can believe anything. They can say anything. And it's quite, it's maddening to me because these kids are being brainwashed. It's abusive. I could go on and on. They're being told a bunch of lies and they believe it. And, kids, Alex and I have plenty of stories to share about college students from the United States there, no crowd movement, who isn't going to have kids because they feel that if they have kids, that, they're going to ruin planet Earth by having kids. It's quite extraordinary, the times that we're living in. I'll leave it at that right there.
Well, Debbie, you and I had that conversation about those young people saying they weren't going to have kids because, they didn't want to overpopulate the earth. And quite frankly, I'm kind of in favor of that with that particular group of people. I think that's an excellent idea. Alex, I want to get you back in because this is an area that you excel in, and that is education and how our youth are being indoctrinated to believe this mind mush that they call sustainable development.
Yeah, and Dan, throughout the conference, it was very clear. Actually, one of the things Al Gore said when he stood up on the stage was, I know everything, it looks a little bit hectic right now. We have President Trump in office and all that. But fear not, right? Over the long term, we've got this under control. All the children are out there marching for climate justice in the streets. I thought that was really revealing. Reminded me of the Pied Piper. Have the kids marching after him. And I think that is the central plank of their strategy, is to brainwash the youth. Debbie and our other colleague, Brennan, who was there, actually ran into a lady who apparently was funded by a grant from the European Union to create these devices, correct me if I'm wrong, Debbie, that measure the CO2 content of the air in the classroom. And then if it goes over a certain level, they were supposed to act like there was something dangerous about this and open up the window, really to reinforce this crazy lunatic idea that CO2 is actually pollution. And, to an adult who had a reasonable education, who learned that, CO2 is the gas we exhale and the plants need it, and that the earth is starving for more of it, as Dr. Will Happer put it in his speech at the climate conference we were all at in Phoenix. That would all sound absolutely stupid, ridiculous, unbelievably insane. And yet, when you start teaching it to children from the time they're in kindergarten and then through elementary school and middle school and high school, then they get a PhD in gender studies with an emphasis on, CO2 is bad. Of course, they're going to come out very, very differently. Right.
And then, Alex, share how they figure out, by if kids are dozing off and that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Debbie and Brendan were told, is that if the CO2 levels get too high, that the kids might start feeling weird and maybe dozing off and getting a little sleepy. And of course, that's all absolute nonsense, right? It's absolute nonsense. You could increase CO2 levels by dozens of times, and you wouldn't notice it at all, right? Because CO2 is not pollution. It's a trace gas. It's incredibly helpful, incredibly beneficial. But this is the kind of stuff they're teaching to children with tax money. And, in America, they've got 87% of the children. I traveled all across the United States and even outside of the United States last year, or I guess technically this year still, 2019. Talking about this, and a big part of my presentation focused on this exact element. I even showed video clips of what they're doing to American children in American classrooms. I was contacted by a mother in Canada while we were in Madrid for the UN Climate Summit, and she told me that her 8-year-old daughter had been told at school that they were all going to die in less than 11 years unless humanity submits to this UN climate regime. And the little girl comes home crying, "Oh, I don't want to die, Mommy. Oh, my goodness." That's child abuse to say that to these little children, to say that they're going to die. And then it goes even one step further. They borrowed some tactics from Mao and Adolf Hitler and others, where they are now deliberately turning children against their parents. They're teaching these poor little children that their parents are the ones responsible for this climate crisis, that they were so greedy that they had to have all their fossil fuels and all their consumption, and that's the reason these poor children are now going to grow up in a hell on earth. Caused by CO2, of course, and climate change. So it's abusive in an extreme way, but it is the core of their strategy. They've looked at the polling data. They know that older Americans overwhelmingly reject this garbage. They know that almost all Republican adults know that the man-made global warming hypothesis is, to quote our dear president, a hoax to benefit the communist Chinese. So, they've given up. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. And so they figured out, hey, we just got to brainwash the kids. And no mistake about it. It's happening in America as well. Our children are being brainwashed. They've got 87% of them in public schools. The great majority of those children are being successfully indoctrinated into believing that we have a climate emergency, now they call it. And you could see this all throughout the COP25. I mean, it was actually one of the central things. Even when the government leaders would stand up, they'd say, "Look, the children are marching outside. They're demanding that we take action. We must listen to the voices of the children." And by coincidence, Debbie and I and Brendan were reading some scripture before going, and we just, coincidence isn't the right word, right? A divine appointment. Maybe. We just started reading some out of Proverbs, and I said, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, right? And here you have all these world leaders. Oh my goodness, the children have spoken. We must listen. Guys, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. That's why they're children. That's why children don't even get to decide what they're going to eat for dinner, much less what kind of policies we're going to live on, right? If children could decide what they were going to eat for dinner, they'd eat ice cream and gummy bears, right? So, of course, we don't let children make small decisions. We certainly shouldn't be letting them make large decisions. And we certainly should not be brainwashing them to believe this idiotic nonsense about CO2 being pollution. But again, that's the way they're going to do it. And I think that's the key takeaway as far as I'm concerned. The science at this point is not even relevant. The evidence is so overwhelming that the UN's hypothesis is phony that this isn't even a scientific it understands that. This is now all going to come down to the education of the children. If the children get a decent education, if they're taught how to think, if they're taught the scientific method, we now have national science standards. It's called the Next Generation Science Standards, developed by the same people who brought you Common Core, Achieve Inc., funded by federal grants, led by actual members of the Council on Foreign Relations, led by actual attendees at Bilderberg. They created this Next Generation Science Standards. In 12 years of so-called science education in a government indoctrination center, these children will never hear the words scientific method unless they have a rogue teacher who dares to deviate from the standards. Mm-hmm. Now, why would the maniacs who developed our national standards not want children to learn about the scientific method? Well, maybe because if we used the scientific method, we would know that the man-made global warming hypothesis is ridiculous, right? So they don't want the kids learning real science. And this is now the battlefront. We need to be crystal clear. Education of children is the main battlefront. The older generations are already dying off. These people are celebrating. I don't know if you guys saw the Democrat politician a couple of days ago celebrating that white men were killing themselves in large numbers. Trump tweeted it out. They love this, right? The older people should start dying off. I had a family member post on Facebook. I can't wait till the older generations die off and we millennials get to run things, because then everything's going to be great. Mm-hmm. That's their plan. That's their plan. And if we don't stop it at the education level, in the public schools, we're going to lose. It's just that simple.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me, and you all have seen this, and if people listening in, hi everybody, by the way, if you're listening in, there's a fantastic book, children's book, that gives an idea of the radical indoctrination that they've been teaching children, or that they had planned for children back from 1994. It's Rescue Mission Planet, an Agenda 21 book for children. And in that book, in the very first couple of pages, Alex, you may remember the exact quote. I can't remember it, but it's a quote from Al Gore saying that he created a mission, Planet Earth, so that children would monitor and save planet Earth. And so I think, going back to Al Gore's, you mentioning Al Gore earlier, Alex, by the way, I got the opportunity to shake his hand. I don't know if we have that. I don't think we have that video. It's much too long, but I don't know, maybe Alex, you're going to do something with it. But you watch him come in. I mean, I am still amazed that God put me in these certain spots at these certain times that, I met Greta Thunberg, I met her father, I met Nancy Pelosi, I met Al Gore at this conference. So it just kept happening over and over again. It's happened in other conferences too. So anyway, I don't want to jinx it. I'm just going to thank the God Almighty for these interactions. But as you see Al Gore coming into this room, I had no idea he was even at the conference, but as I was getting free food and drink, as Alex can tell you, every night and every day at COP conferences, at United Nations conferences, out comes the free food, out comes the free wine, the champagne, the celebration starts at like 5:30-ish, right? And so anyway, so if you're like starving journalists like we are, we're like, free food, free drink. I'm ready for some after, listening to the devil's work all day. You're ready to drink when you're there. And so anyway, I'm hanging out in the We Are Still In booth, which is the United States, meaning the United States, we are still in the Paris Agreement. And we are. We technically are. We're not out until the 2020 United States presidential election. But that's if you even think that the Paris Agreement is an actual treaty that, holds some weight. But we're all acting as if it is, and if it's law, but we're not out. So you have this movement. This is why Nancy Pelosi and Senator Whitehouse, and who else was there? Jared Huffman from California, and some other Congress people who showed up on day one of the United Nations COP25 conference in Madrid that we just got back from. And they were stating this, it was their monumental moment to say, we are still, despite Trump, we're still in the Paris Agreement. So here I am in the We Are Still In booth, who they partner with the World Wildlife Federation. And if you follow the WWF, their conservation movement, it's a scary for me, for the United States partnership. But anyway, so there I am waiting for free food and free drink. I all of a sudden hear that Al Gore is going to be in the room. I'm like, what? There's like 10 of us in this room. I'm not kidding. And they're expecting Al Gore anytime. Well, then all of a sudden a bunch of people come in. So we know that, and the camera crews are coming in, and I'm right in front of this little stage. It's a tiny room. And Al Gore is going through and he's hugging people. And then all of a sudden there's me. And I'm like, oh, Al Gore. And I stick out my hand to shake his. And it's like the devil is looking at me. His smile disappears. In fact, he looks, just mean. And he gives me a mean look. In fact, people have been commenting about his mean look. I don't know. Maybe after several years of interacting with him, and asking about the 10-year tipping point where Miami was supposed to be under water, according to Al Gore. Maybe he recognized me. I don't know. But just their message to the world is, we're not giving up. We're still in. And I have to tell you, maybe some people out there have a little bit, aren't as Debbie Downer about this thing, but I think we have a long way to go. And Dan, I think you feel differently than I do. I think we have a long way to go before we are turning this ship around back to truth, integrity, honesty, natural rights, God-given rights. I think we have a big battle in front of us. And if we can't get more people, their whole message is we need to act and we need to act now. Well, I think we need to have the same message out there. But our message isn't about, the doom and gloom. Our message is about truth and honesty and true science, not the capital science that they're calling it these days. But anyway, they've got, big names showing up. Harrison Ford was at the conference. They have some big names showing up on behalf of lies and deception. And so anyway.
Well, Debbie, part of that, and I agree with you, we're in a battle that'll probably take 50 years to 100 years because it's taken that long to destroy this country the way they have. And but I have to tell you, I'm surprised you didn't have your hand amputated after shaking hands with the devil.
This hand, guys, here.
That had to be kind of like, I don't know, putting your hand in a pile of manure or something, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's surreal, kind of the feeling, because it was like for me, touching the devil's hand. And so, but I had to fake that I was excited to see him. I really did. I was faking it. And so maybe I came off too fake, and that's why he gave me that.
Did it feel like he had just moisturized before you did that?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Well, something we've got to get back to, though. This is the thing. They plan on reducing the world's population. And Debbie, you're a major player in UN Agenda 21, advocating against it. And that one of the primary goals of Agenda 21 is to reduce the world's population to fewer than 1 billion people.
Yeah.
What a great way to do it, Alex. They get our kids to hate anybody over 50. They've already stated to a certain extent that anybody over 70 shouldn't even be alive. And so what a great way to get rid of a large segment of the population that knows what's going on.
That's exactly right, Dan. And, I think it's a multi-pronged effort. Part of it is to make sure that the wisdom of older generations is not transmitted to the younger generations. And, we're seeing this deliberate effort. Mao was a master of this. He turned all the children against their parents. He literally had children reporting their parents to communist authorities so they could be dragged out of their houses and flogged or even executed. That's the kind of stuff that they're trying to prepare children for now. They are also deliberately teaching them that there's no right and wrong, through values clarification. They use really dishonest schemes. Like they tell the kids that they're in a life raft and they have to choose which one or two people they're going to kill so that, the life raft doesn't sink and things like this. They're manipulating these kids into believing that right and wrong don't really exist. They're just, subjective ideas that people have. And this population control narrative was so ubiquitous at the conference, you couldn't escape it. We have a lot of stories about that. Actually, Debbie came up to me and said, Alex, we just saw this guy up on stage and he was absolutely nuts, just raving about population control. We have to interview him. Okay, Debbie, that's awesome. And then sure enough, he shows up in the media room. So Debbie's like, Alex, he's over there. So quickly we rush over there, microphone. Hey, would you be willing to do an interview? Oh, yeah, absolutely. And so we get this guy on camera. I think I sent you guys the link to the YouTube if you guys want even a clip from it. But we did a 22-minute interview with this guy, I think. And the whole time he thought that, he sounded normal and reasonable. Because afterwards he actually thanked me. He's, oh, thank you. What a great interview. Keep up the great work. Like, dude. But, some of the stuff this guy said, I'll give you an example. About the population crisis, what do we do? And he points his finger in my face and he says, have any more babies. I'm looking at you, white man. And I didn't have the heart to tell him I've already got 4, and hopefully, Lord willing, we'll have many more. And he was serious about that. Find out just how radical. I kept trying to give him an out, an opportunity to, rescue himself from this idiocy, this mess he had dug himself into. And I said, okay, let's talk about John Holdren and Paul Ehrlich, the two population control nuts. John Holdren, of course, was Obama's science czar. What was his title? The director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Mm-hmm. Paul Ehrlich, of course, was the neo-Malthusian nut job who published the population bomb. That was his big claim to fame, that there was going to be too many people, not enough resources. Of course, he famously got humiliated in that bet where he bet with the Economist about whether prices for oil and other things that Paul Ehrlich said were going to run out would be higher or lower. I think it was in 10 years. And obviously prices were lower because new technology, free markets, abundance. But I asked this guy, I said, Paul Ehrlich and John Holdren. He's like, oh, I know those guys. Yeah, since I'm a director, I get to meet all these cool people. Like, okay, you're insane. And then about his book, this eco science, because Holdren and Ehrlich did a joint book in 1977 called Eco Science, and it is absolutely bonkers. They propose. They say there's this population. They actually said global cooling was going to kill us all. This was back in the late 70s. They still thought it was going to be global cooling. Remarkably, these solutions were exactly the same as the solutions today for global warming. Right? Less people, give us more money, give up your freedom, world government, all the rest of it. So they wrote in this book that we needed a planetary regime to control all resources. They said the population crisis was getting so severe we needed to consider dramatic options to deal with it. One of the options they mentioned was forced abortions, which they said could be sustained in America under the existing Constitution. We wouldn't even need a constitutional amendment to strap women down to tables and murder their babies against their will, right? Forced abortions, let that sink in. This is the kind of stuff the barbarians running communist China do. And then they proposed also adding sterilizing agents to the water supply. Mm-hmm. Involuntarily sterilizing the entire population of the United States and the world. And so I asked this guy, his name is Michael Wadley. He was the director of what he claimed was the most viewed documentary of all history. It was called Woodstock. I had never heard of it, but apparently they did a documentary about the LSD and the drug-fueled, rock and roll concert. And so I asked this guy, did they maybe go a little bit too far with, the mandatory abortions and the sterilizing everybody by putting stuff in the water supply? And he says, oh, you haven't even heard me talking yet. As in they weren't radical enough. This is where these people are going. And this is a guy who was given a very prominent speaking slot on the most prominent public stage at this UN venue. Several times. That's right. After we interviewed him, we went back and heard him talking again. And he was talking about we need a world government. He said, it's, voluntary policies aren't going to cut it. We need coercion to force this stuff on people. And he had it in his mind that we needed to depopulate Europe and the United States and Canada. So in his view, white people were the problem. That wasn't, a feeling that was shared among all the population control nuts. Some of them thought that we should get rid of the Africans. Others thought that, we needed to get rid of the Asians. So, what particular group of people needed to be targeted for this varied depending on which population control nut you talk to. But they all agreed, way too many people, consuming too many resources. We need to reduce the number of people. So we got a lot of footage on this. Debbie actually onto another guy. Yep. Can you hear me?
Actually, I have, there's a gentleman here that has a flannel shirt with a bandana, and I caught the part that you were just talking about in the video.
Yeah,
show
him. Yeah, that'd be great. So people can see this for themselves.
Yeah, let me put that up there for you.
That's him. There he is.
There he is. Yeah, this guy he's a piece of work. Just a few little clips I listened to just to find this. Here you go.
And it will work out, but not if hashtag you don't love me, mom and dad, right? We got to get to that 10% GDP.
Okay, and my understanding is that you also touched on the population issue.
Right.
Do you consider that an important issue, and what do you think ought to be done to deal with it?
Don't have children, and I'm looking at you, white men. Now, what I mean by that is that, again, let's take Sweden as an example. If you take the average lifetime emissions of a Swedish baby that's going to be brought into the the world, and you compare that to the average Tanzanian, which is the average African emissions, right? It is 46 to 1. Now that means if you were into population control or population reduction, which is a good idea worldwide, you should go to Sweden, because if your efforts...
Isn't this guy just a piece of work? Oh my God!
He drove me.
Okay, so when I first heard his speech, he was in the first week, so he was there the whole 2 weeks, he and his wife. And when I first heard his speech, I walked in halfway into his presentation, and there were things that were making sense to me. And here's what made sense. You guys all might be going, what? But Alex, I think Alex will agree with me on this. That he was saying, he was using Sweden and Tanzania and the Green New Deal, or he never talked about Agenda 21. In fact, he didn't even know what Agenda 21 is. I asked if he knew, and he said no. But anyway, if you look at what the Paris Agreement calls for and the reduction of emissions and your carbon footprint, he's saying they're cutting it. They're doing it across the United Nations is doing it across the board, which is not fair. Is what he's saying, because the emissions, the carbon footprint from a Swedish person who lives a very good lifestyle compared to those of Tanzania is simply not fair. So if you're going to do across the board cut, you already have this poor. And Alex, if you can explain it even better, go for it. But you already have this really poor, in need population in Tanzania. And if you cut their carbon footprint, it's going to make them even in more need and more. So that was just a point that he was trying to say, look, this isn't fair. He was saying, this whole cut the emissions across the board simply is not fair. So we need to go deeper cuts into places like Sweden and the United States and some of these more, wealthy countries where we live really a good lifestyle compared to people in really, really poor nations and countries where the government is really hampering the way these people live. It's not, a limited number of resources. It's government has their foot on the neck of these people.
Well, it's fascinating, guys, that somebody like this can be a main speaker at the UN. I mean, I was ready for somebody that looked a little bit more let's say, polished. I mean, this guy looks like he's straight out of Haight-Ashbury and Woodstock or something. And what a flake.
And he was just one of many. Debbie turned me on to another guy. Was it Stuart Scott or Scott Stewart?
Stuart Scott.
Stuart Scott. So Debbie had watched this guy, Scott Stewart, who was also given a very, very prominent speaking role. He spoke multiple times on the most...
almost every day he had a panel, a press conference.
Yeah, and so he's from this group called Scientists Warning. And we interviewed him too. We actually caught up with him outside of the conference. And, I try not to give myself away at these things because, once they know who you are, they don't want to talk to you. But so, hey, I heard you had a really important speech about the need for population control. And can I interview you? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Please. Same thing. This whole idea that we're going to reduce CO2 emissions by reducing the human population has now become a very regular theme at these UN summits. And actually, the first UN summit that I went to, fresh out of journalism school, this was in 2009. I went to the COP, I think it was 15 or something, in Copenhagen, in Denmark. And the communist Chinese had hosted like this event where they said, hey, because of our wonderful population control policies, there's been 300 million fewer births. And, the average carbon footprint of one of our citizens is X CO2, then multiply that by 300 million. And that's how much CO2 we have prevented from being emitted into the atmosphere. Don't you think we're doing wonderful? And I was like, oh my goodness, did I really just hear that? Like, are these people serious? They're going to brag about mass murder because they've reduced the carbon footprint of China? That's really weird. And so I asked this Stuart Scott guy, or Scott Stewart, whatever it is, I can never remember. Stuart Scott, yes. I asked him, what do you think about these communist Chinese policies? Do you think they've maybe gone a little bit too far? Kidnapping women and strapping them to tables and murdering their 8-month-old baby before it's even born. Interestingly, the communist China, he would not say no. You shouldn't murder unborn babies right before they're born to enforce your population control nut job stuff. But that's the mindset at these places, and that's what I'm trying to warn people in America. If these people get their way, you can kiss your freedom goodbye. You can kiss your family goodbye. You can kiss your children goodbye. You can kiss your religious freedom. He actually specifically said, these religious people, they're the big problem because they won't let us talk about this. So I did get to ask Wadley a funny question about that. I don't think he understood where I was coming from, but I said, hey, if all the progressives and the people who care so much about the environment, the godless people only have, 0 children or 1 child, and all the Christian nuts and all the Muslims have, 10, what's going to happen? You guys are going to be outnumbered very significantly. And he's like, yeah, that is actually a problem. You're right. But we as communicators, we need to do a better job of educating them so that they wanted it. So, it's such a clown show, Dan, but these people are absolutely dangerous. And, to be honest, I think a lot of these people believe this stuff. I think Michael Wadley was genuine and sincere in that he thinks there's too many people on the planet. He especially wanted to eliminate Swedes for whatever reason. And, I take that personally. My wife is from half my kids are born.
I know that.
but I don't know what he's got against the poor Swedes. They try their best to be environmentally conscious to the point of, absolute fanaticism. But it's crazy. It's crazy.
I don't know. You know what, Alex?
To show Americans.
Sorry to interrupt, but maybe because of the rise and fame of Greta, he decided, that if he did something on Sweden, that he would get more attention. And why so somebody in the United States might be saying, so what? These are a couple of, one-off crazy men. But Alex and I did a little bit of research, and I can't remember the names associated with Stuart Scott and the scientist warning. But it was names that are people in Congress who are connected to this organization. George P. Schultz is connected. I mean, it is big names who are involved in supporting. And I asked I asked Wadley how he got such a big stage at the conference, and several times. And he said that the warming scientists had sponsored him. And so Stuart Scott said the same thing, that in one of his presentations, in fact, in all of his presentations, he ended his presentation with thanking all these people. He never wanted to answer questions. The Stuart Scott guy, he always went really long, so that there was no time for us press to say, hey, wait a minute, I have a question for you. But anyway, one evening, Alex and I just started pouring through who supports these guys. And it was eye-popping. It was leaders in the United States. So these guys are significant. Their message is strong. And they've got a lot of support and a lot of money behind them.
Well, Debbie, you know this, and Alex, you know this as well as anyone. The so-called establishment Republicans and the Democrats, they're in bed together, and they are all in this progressive mindset, which is pro-communist, pro-Marxist. Why don't they go after the red Chinese and the communist regimes around the world that are polluting like crazy if they're really all that concerned about CO2?
That is the $1 million question, Dan, and I'm so glad you asked it, because as far as I'm concerned, that proves that the cult leaders do not even believe the nonsense they're teaching their brainwashed followers. If they really believed that CO2 is so bad and so dangerous, China would have been public enemy number one. About a fourth of all the CO2 emissions on this planet now come from communist China, and they are building coal-fired power plants faster than you can even imagine. I mean, just boatloads of them, right? Almost every day, new power plants are coming online, new polluting things. And, I don't begrudge them at all for that. The more CO2 they want to emit, the better. It'll be good for the plants. It'll be good for agricultural yields. It'll be wonderful for the planet. If they want to create CO2, let them do it as much as they want. But if you are truly convinced that CO2 is a pollution, that we're all going to die from this pollution, everybody at this conference would have been focused on China, right? Under the Paris Agreement, their commitment was that maybe when 2030 comes around, we'll think about calling that our peak emission. So they promise they're going to continue increasing their CO2 emissions for at least the next 15 years. Meanwhile, the United States is, CO2 emissions are dropping like a rock, and yet somehow America was the worst of all the countries at this summit. In fact, on a regular basis, America was demonized as the worst climate criminal, the biggest evil force on the planet. And China really does have a lot of pollution. I mean, actual pollution. Their cities are disgusting. Their rivers are disgusting. The ocean there is disgusting. Everything is disgusting. And, to attack the United States, I think is just proof that the cult leaders behind this clown show do not believe the lies that they're spewing. If they did, the entire focus on this summit would have been China. They would have said, China, why can't you be more like America? America's CO2 emissions are dropping like a rock because they're switching over to natural gas and things. Why are you guys doing that? Nothing about that. Absolutely nothing. Same thing with Russia, Dan, and we actually found some real Russia collusion. And we can get into that a little bit later. But, 50% of Russian exports are fossil fuels, right? Petroleum and oil and natural gas and all these different fossil fuels. And yet nobody was talking about Russia, right? Nobody was talking about Russia. In fact, the Climate Action Network, which was really the biggest climate activist group there, we found out was being financed. Their biggest single donor was the Sea Change Foundation. We did a little bit of digging, and I remember having written some articles back in 2018 and 2014 that touched on the Sea Change Foundation. This is basically like a giant slush fund where anybody who wants to fund green groups can pour money into pretty secretly. One of the sources of money for the Sea Change Foundation was a shell corporation in Bermuda called Klein Limited. And this shell corporation was being funded by the Kremlin. And so you have the Russian government, again, 50% of their exports is oil, natural gas, right? Fossil fuels, sending dirty money to this shell corporation in Bermuda so that it could then be sent to the Sea Change Foundation so that it could then be distributed to green groups. And our Congress actually talked about why they were doing this. The media didn't touch. They claim to be so concerned about Russia collusion. Then when we find real collusion, nobody wants to talk about it. But the reason Congress said the Russians were funding green groups in the United States that were demanding that we keep our oil in the ground, that we shut all our power plants down, was to keep Europe and the rest of the world dependent on Russian energy, whereas American energy is cheaper, more cost effective, more ethically produced, less CO2 intensive. So, if the cult leaders really believe the narrative that they are pushing on their brainwashed, blind followers, they would have been focused on Russia, China. They wouldn't have been flying 25,000 people in from around the world on CO2 spewing airplanes. So they don't believe this. That's key takeaways here. The people running the show do not believe this. And if you're one of these brainwashed kids out there marching for climate justice, you might, well, wait, if the leaders of this freak show don't believe this stuff, why am I out here marching, right? Maybe I should do some research. But it doesn't occur to them, and the media doesn't talk about it.
Well, I think it'd be fun to show that clip.
Yeah, I've got it ready right here.
Oh my goodness.
There you go.
Wow.
That is a clip of just after Greta. So they gave Greta. This isn't the same clip that Alex was just talking about with the Russian collusion, but it does show the indoctrination of the kids. This is one of the main stages. You can't get in this room. The only reason I got in this room is as a journalist, which is an awesome privilege at these conferences to come under the New American Magazine. As a journalist, we get into things that people like CFACT, Mark Morano, nobody can get into these rooms like the New American and cover what happens at these conferences like the New American. So for all you listeners out there, I would heavily recommend subscribing to the New American if you haven't already. But that was after Greta Thunberg. That was her final day at the conference, and everybody was following Greta. It was a frenzy. The great Greta, everywhere she went, there was pushing. The United Nations police pushed me. I almost fell at one instant. But anyway, that was where Greta came up to stage, not to talk about her feelings as she told the world, but rather to talk about the science. And so she went on for about 15 minutes of talking about the science. She's a brilliant orator. She really is. I do give her credit for that at 16 years old. But what Alex was, and so I wanted you to play that earlier. So thank you for playing that, Thumper, because it shows the power of these kids. They got the full-on biggest stage in the world when it comes to the United Nations. By the way, what I didn't capture in that clip that was done with my cell phone is there was just like at the Salt Lake City United Nations conference I went to earlier earlier in the summer. There's a growing coalition of indigenous people going to these conferences, and something that you don't hear them yelling there on stage is stolen land, stolen land. And what they're talking about is they've got a United States map where you see tribes all over the United States where they've claimed that, this territory was like Lake Tahoe, for example, this was X tribe. And so what they're referring to is white colonists took over the land, stole the land, and they want the land back. But
right. Well, and didn't Obama actually signed on to that nonsense, onto the Indigenous Peoples Treaty on behalf of the United States? He couldn't do it because it's supposed to be by treaty. It's supposed to be ratified by the Congress, by the Senate. But he did anyway. And so they're promoting that idea the whole country needs to go back to the indigenous people. That's part of this whole scam. Well, Alex, you're mentioning that thing with Russia and that shell corporation in the Caribbean. They were the Russians were the number one group promoting the shutting down of fracking in the United States. That was part of the deal. They were promoting the end of fracking in the United States. Debbie, this whole thing is just so ridiculous. I want to keep you in this discussion too. Tell us about Greta, and then maybe we can show that little clip of the guy going and exposing her car for all the plastic and junk that was in the seats.
Yeah, and first of all, Greta is. So we saw her last year. In fact, last year at COP24, she was sitting the row in front of me and just a few people to my left. So, I was watching her during the Trump administration's presentation at COP24 on the United States use of mixed energy. So, no, it's not just solar, it's not just wind. We're going to use everything, which I think is a great thing. Mm-hmm. So when she got up from last year, she wasn't really famous. She was definitely not Person of the Year. And when she got up early out of that Trump administration back at COP24, she was carrying it was like a Santa Claus plastic bag full of tchotchke stuff from the United Nations conference. Because one of the things that when you go to these conferences, which I hope more people go to these conferences, we really do need help at these conferences. We need, hundreds of people there, not only to be covering what they're, dictating to the world, which we're seeing happen, the Green New Deal. If anybody thinks we're not going to get a part of the Green New Deal, they're crazy. We are going to get a part of the Green New Deal. I don't know what part, but we will. You just watch. And so anyway, we need a lot of people covering these. We also need a lot of people to have the other conversations, to have the conversations with these people, these kids mostly, these young people that the adults at these conferences are not willing to have. And one thing that's super easy to point out to these young people is the hypocrisy of these conferences. They're just a huge engagement. All the stuff that's brought in, all the flooring and the carpeting and the plants and the air vac and, just tons, and all the private cars that you see. It's just, it's a huge testament to the hypocrisy in the climate change movement, the man-made climate change movement. But anyway, so there's Greta last year with this big old plastic Santa Claus bag full of tchotchkes. She was much heavier than she is today. I had a conversation with her father at this conference at COP25 and asked her, what do you think? Are you worried about her? And I was talking about her health. And I said, she looks extremely thin to me. And he said, she's fine. She said, I'm worried. He said, I'm worried about both my daughters. His other daughter, by the way, Greta's sister, also has Asperger's, right? Asperger's, Alex? Yeah. Okay. Alex is shaking his head. Yes. They both have Asperger's, and they are trying to set up, what I heard firsthand was that they're trying to set up the other sister as the women, the gender equality.
Sure. The feminist of the two.
Right. But all that to say, there is this frenzy around this little thing called Greta. And so, she really was the conference, in my opinion. Everywhere she was, there were hordes and hordes of people. It was almost like people, they wanted to touch her, and they were touching a saint or something. In fact, I think she's gotten the name Saint Greta or something like that. But it's just amazing the attention that this child is getting around the world. So anyway, and before you go into the clip about the plastic, we met up with Rebel News when Alex came. We hooked up with them. We met Rebel News last year. Sheila wanted to interview Alex, but to our surprise, a guy named Kian Bexty was at the conference from Rebel News as well. And I knew who he was because I had seen the very first video he did about Greta, which is where he is following, he's in Alberta, Canada, and the only Tesla that, remember, Greta was dragging around with her dad and BBC in this Tesla from North America to Canada. And the Tesla belongs to not Alex Newman, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Mm-hmm. It's Arnold Schwarzenegger's Tesla. And there aren't very many Teslas, according to this millennial Kian Bexty, who's an awesome investigative reporter out of Canada. And so anyway, he finds out that where the Tesla is. He's followed it, and there's, it doesn't take, I guess, very many calls to find out that this Tesla is at a certain hotel. I don't know what hotel, but Kian goes to this hotel. There is the Tesla, and he's filming it, right? He does a video of it. And then he figures out how to get into the room. He could see Greta and her father and BBC talking through this window. And he's like, how do I get up there? But anyway, you should go back and watch that video. It's, I think, back in October off Rebel News. But anyway, so here we are meeting at COP25, this Kian Bexty, who I've seen this video. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're my hero. Well, he shows us this video clip of the Tesla. And Alex and I are like, you have to do something with that. You can't sit on it. You must do something with it. So anyway, he was like, so Alex, I think we get credit for that video going viral.
Debbie, can we ask you, do you have permission to play this? Can we play through the whole thing on this radio program?
Oh, absolutely. It's public. It's on YouTube. It's gotten something like, what, Alex, like 900,000 views already, something like that.
Okay, good.
Almost. Hey, guys, before we go any further, guys, let me just give 1 second. I am going to sign off from the computer part of it and just talk on the phone, if that's all right with you guys, because a whole bunch of bouncy boys just arrived back at the place where I am. You guys don't mind, I'm just going to stay on the phone, and I'll be with you. So.
Alex, I'd love to see your bouncy boys, though.
Yeah.
Hey, we had such a good time at your ranch, Dan, and they really like Uncle Dan. So, but yeah, I'll be on the phone. You guys won't be able to see me, but you will be able to hear me. So.
Oh no!
All right. Here's the video, guys.
I want to believe that it's not Greta's car. I want to believe that it's not her, and I can't confirm it. So I will not talk about her.
Well, today we're here at the COP25 summit, as they call it, and we're going to be asking the folks here what they think about St. Greta's sin. You might notice in this footage is climate contraband. There is plastic water bottles, there's plastic grocery bags, there's plastic utensils in her containers of beans that she's littered around the back of her dumpster. I mean, in the back of her Tesla. There's everything. This is a car full of climate contraband, and we're going to ask these folks here at the COP25 summit what they think about it before they know that it's Greta's car, of course. We'll tell them that after the fact. Let's go see what they have to say. Do you think that the people that refuse to avoid using plastic, are they responsible?
Yeah. I don't have to think much of it, and it's just one world. Why?
For me, it's like basically killing your own dog. Like a dog can be a pet, but it's also an animal. But you wouldn't do that to your own pet.
Just think of the whales and all that, all those closely endangered species as your children, and how you would feel if you were killing your own children.
Do you think that the people who use it, do you think that maybe they're just lazy?
Yeah, I think, and they think they're saving money, but in the long term, they're not really saving much because the planet will be gone. So it's not saving much.
Yes, I was going to say, it's like a selfish inconvenience thing.
What do you think Greta Thunberg would say to people who continue to use plastic, even though they know how damaging it is to the environment?
I think she would be very angry at them.
Stop using plastic because it'll help a great deal.
Do you think maybe these people are just uneducated? They don't know what's going on?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's just a matter of them learning.
Shame, shame, shame.
How dare you? I was going to say it.
How dare you?
How dare you?
Do you think Greta Thunberg uses plastic water bottles?
I hope not. I don't know.
So we see lots of people driving Teslas, you know, and they're like, oh, we're saving the environment. But in the Teslas, in the cup holder is a plastic water bottle. Do you think some of these people are just hypocrites?
Honestly, yeah, I think so. And I think it's easy to like jump and to be part of the trend of like going green, going healthy. So I think that a lot of it is like this new kind of trend or fad that's going on of trying to save the environment. But I think at the end of the day, people don't really care and they just want to have the image.
So one thing I want to show you, it's footage that I took actually of Greta Thunberg's car. This is her car. These are the Aboriginal beads that were given to her by native bands.
Yeah, but it's kind of hard. It's not to be unpolite, but it's kind of hard to believe because Greta is kind of it's really a hope for my family, my generation. So if I don't have like strong evidence, I can give you an answer.
What do you think about that?
I don't know what is the source of the photos. I'm afraid I cannot say anything.
If they were true, if they're real, and I can promise you they are, what do you think about them?
Well, nobody should use plastics in the first place, but I don't know what is the source, so I'm afraid I cannot really say.
I took it myself. Why are you surprised that Greta Thunberg, someone who...
Surprised that you're using plastic.
This is for using.
Oh. Have you used single-use plastics?
We're not the climate messiah.
I don't know what was the case and why was it bought, but as I say, I wouldn't take any stand on this just because it is unclear to me what is the source and if it's really true.
Fair enough.
So I want to believe that it's not Greta's car. I want to believe that it's not her, and I can't confirm it. So I will not talk about.
Really sucks when you get caught being a hypocrite, huh?
It was her car. As much as you didn't want to believe it, it was St. Greta's Pope Mobile, really. Full to the brim, chock full of climate contraband. It breaks my heart. We spoke to so many people today who just couldn't believe it. We watched them cycle through the stages of grief, not believing that St. Greta was a sinner, just like everybody else. For Rebel News in Madrid, I'm Cian Bexty. There is nobody at this conference exposing Greta as the sinner that she is. And boy, oh boy, is she a climate sinner. The climate contraband was riddled throughout her car, and nobody in the mainstream media would dare publish something like that, but we would here at Rebel News. You can see all of our footage at rebelun.com. You can pitch in a few bucks to help us out with our costs. They're very expensive to get us out here to talk to all of these Greta deniers, because that's what they are. They're the real deniers. They don't believe that Greta is a sinner, but facts are facts. please go to rebelun.com to pitch in a few bucks, help us with our coverage so that we can get home and keep doing our jobs. Thanks so much for watching.
Oh boy, when you get caught being a hypocrite,
that's so fun. It is so fun. And that's, one reason why we need more people to help cover this conference, because the stuff, we're only through for our crew, we were only 3 of us. And I'd advance some of these talks. And then, as Alex shared earlier, I'd go and say, Alex, you got to go interview this person. But, the conference had something like 25 to 30,000 people there. There were thousands of either panel discussions, press conferences, high-level meetings, way too much for just 3 people to cover during 2 weeks. So, where Kian is asking for money, just like Rebel News, New American, CFACT, Climate Depot, we're all in the same boat, paying our own way or having very little funds available to do the real coverage that we need to do at these conferences. They really do come home and mean something. We could have predicted the Green New Deal a long time ago. The Green New Deal is nothing new. It is absolutely 1,000% from Agenda 21. Agenda 21 being that 100-year plan for the 21st century. People keep saying, oh, it's now the 2030 agenda. No, guys, it's not. The 2030 agenda is only the first 30 years of a 100-year plan. So the first 30 years, they have to make super aggressive. Why? Because they need this thing called Agenda 21, the Paris Agreement, whatever it is, the Sustainable Development Goals. They need it to have such a firm foundation in our society and all society across the world in order to make it stick. So, of course, they've got to go extreme in the first 30 years so that they could, again, have that foundation in place to fully implement Agenda 21, the 100-year plan. So, anyway, I hope I'm making that clear there. But anyway, isn't that awesome coverage? Alex did that, too, on the Russian collusion deal. He had a good time, and there was some good video from that. So, anyway, Alex is still there.
Debbie, you've been talking about Agenda 21. You and I met, as a matter of fact, talking about Agenda 21. You were covering wolves at the time, I believe. Yeah. But this is all about global government. This is all about global communist, Marxist, socialist, feudalist, technocratic government. And the only way that they can get this in place is by selling people on this gigantic lie called climate change, called sustainable development. Yeah. Go ahead and tell people a little bit more about some of the people that were at this event. Did you see a whole lot of scientists there?
No, I did see James Hansen. Alex may be able to, hopefully, Alex, throw in some names if you can think of any scientist. Well, besides, okay, so on December 3rd, so the conference started December 2nd. On December 3rd, by the way, December 2nd was my big 5-0 birthday, and I spent it. Hopefully, Thumper, you could show that little clip that I took of Nancy Pelosi. So Nancy Pelosi was there on my birthday. I should have said, hey, Nancy, it's my 50th birthday. I might have gotten a response, but as you'll hopefully see in this video, you're not going to get, okay, this is it. You won't get any response, but I'll just let it play. Molly from Arizona.
You think so?
Can you comment about Agenda 21? That's H. Conres 353. Why you went to the Rio Earth Summit, Nancy?
Sorry, got to stay with the group. All right.
Won't comment.
From which state? I think maybe Colorado. I can't remember what, or Midwest. And then the very last guy was appointed EPA guy. So, why? Okay, so Dan, we know that it was Nancy's baby back in 1992. In fact, on December 2nd, she, at that press conference, so where all these people are exiting from, is a press conference. I just happened to be in the room. I had no idea Nancy Pelosi was there. But I saw this commotion happening on the first day, and usually the first day is not met with bells and whistles of these conferences. It's, they're just setting up. Usually when, the second week, and that's why Alex comes the second week, that's when things really pick up at this conference. But Nancy and about 15 to 20 others from the United States showed up specifically to state we are still in. And as she opened up the press conference, she mentioned that she was at the first Rio Earth Summit in 1992, which is where they coined or promulgated. They didn't coin the phrase Agenda 21 there. They promulgated it. They announced it to the world that we have this thing called HConRes 353, United Nations Agenda 21, Sustainable Development, and that the future would be a sustainable future. Now, that sounds like a great word. Sustainable means that things last, but that's not what this means when it comes to man-made anthropogenic global warming and this global governance that you're talking about, Dan. The three pillars of Agenda 21 are social equity, environmental justice, and economic justice. And those things can be, translated into, I'm not kidding, I'm not being sarcastic, I'm not being a smart mouth, but rocks have rights, rivers have rights under environmental justice. Economic justice is simply wealth redistribution. In fact, according to the United Nations, the United States, and according to these attendees too, the United States, I think Alex interviewed a couple people who said that the United States should be paying more. And then the other is social justice. This is where we get all this, transgenderism and how many LGBTQ, ABC, all the way to Z names now, that we need to even the playing field, as Obama said, that everybody must have skin in the game. So Agenda 21 is nothing new. The Green New Deal is nothing new. But it is, as stated so many times, an agenda for the 21st century, a 100-year plan for a total global governance system where the United Nations is the governing body around the environment.
By the way, I was sent this earlier today, and Nancy has come a long way. All right. Once upon a time, Nancy Pelosi was Miss Lubrac. Lubrac, a.k.a. former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi was Miss Lubrac, 1959. From 2007 to 2011, she was third in line for the presidency of the, in the event of the deaths. President, vice president.
Thumper, I think she's still a pretty good Miss Lubrac.
Well, it's just it's that bottle of scotch,
Yeah. I'm thinking, they lube her head before they pull all that skin off of it when they're stretching her head to try to make her look 20 years younger than she really is.
I'm wondering where her boudoir thingy, whatever that is. I'm wondering where the tassels are, like where Madonna.
Yeah. Anyway, she's come quite a ways, hasn't she?
Yeah. Well, maybe, maybe not. Thumper, one of the, and I have to tell you, Debbie, I saw in there Raul Ravalga. He's a representative, he's a congressman from Arizona, and he is the head of the Congressional Environmental Committee. He's the guy that is pushing all these crazy programs in the U.S. Congress.
Yep. He is. Same with Jared Huffman of California. You'll see that Jared Huffman was there too. We've been battling Jared Huffman for years now over the Klamath River dams, the hydroelectric, clean, green, renewable energy dams, which I speak so much and often about, the largest dam destruction project in worldwide history. And of course, most of the world considers hydroelectric, geothermal as well, as one of the cleanest, greenest renewable energy sources, but not in the state of California. In fact, last year, and maybe Alex can talk to this, Alex interviewed a couple of elected officials about about California's movement. Now, and Alex, you're still here, right? Oh, he's muted. And maybe Alex could jump in. But the two shining cities on the hill, besides Miss Greta Thunberg, are California and China, as were they last year, meaning this California and China are the way they're used as the role model for whatever reason China is, I don't know, but California is often used as the role model for what the future looks like. And so when you talk to, there were a couple elected officials, there was our EPA director, Jared Bloomfield, who also showed up to COP25. I had the opportunity to talk to him privately about the destruction of the Klamath River dams, this agenda to destroy them. And of course, out come the questions. They don't, guys, here's the thing. When you're there and you start asking them these tough questions, they don't want to answer. And you saw Nancy, she authored the bill, even calling it Agenda 21 back in 1992. It's on C-SPAN still. And she said, we must make the road to Rio a reality. Her bill, she talked about Agenda 21. She used those words. But when you ask them a question, you saw the blank stare. When you asked Al Gore about his 10-year tipping point, his 10-year predictions, they have this blank stare. They need more and more people like us to call them on their rhetoric, their nonsense, their lies. They're getting away with it. Why? Because either we're too afraid to confront them, or we're too PC, or we're too busy working, trying to put food on the table for your families and save your ranches and your farms and et cetera, et cetera. But these guys aren't being called on it enough.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right, Debbie. It's a matter right now. This is literally an all-out war, and if we don't realize how deadly serious these people are about destroying us, because I had Harry Booyans on a couple of weeks ago. I mean, what we're seeing happen to the Boers in South Africa is a precursor to what they'd love to see happen to the United States, to Western Europe, to all the non-communist free market countries in the world.
Yeah.
Well, Alex, I hope you're still on, because I'd love to have you talk about some of the other interviews that you were involved with Debbie, and then we can show a few more of the clips that you've got.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dan. I am actually still on, but unfortunately, my cell phone is muted. So if somebody could unmute my cell phone.
You're good. You're loud and clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's because I'm talking through my computer right now, but I'm fixing to leave, depart from my computer. So
unfortunately, Alex, you're going to have to unmute your phone. I can't do it through the Zoom app. You're going to have to figure out how to unmute it on your phone there.
That's because it's unmuted on my phone. The only place it shows up as muted is on the Zoom app. It's the one that starts with 786.
Okay, well, I think as long as you're communicating with us, I guess we don't really care what it shows.
Yeah, I would love to talk about some of the interviews we did. We got some priceless footage. Some of it has not even been posted online yet. We did an interview with a little German girl called what was her? Naomi Zeipt.
Yeah, Naomi.
The Breitbart labeled her the anti-Greta, and I asked her about it, and she didn't like that moniker, so we won't call her the anti-Greta. But, she was a really sweet little girl, and she understood climate science better than probably 99% of the people in that UN climate conference combined, and did a phenomenal job talking about it. She's gotten quite a bit of attention for herself in Germany, exposing the climate hoax. And, we think it's bad in America, but Germany is like a whole nother world. It says I need to push 6 to unmute. Let's see if that works. Did I unmute myself? No, that didn't work. *6.
That did it.
There you go. Yeah.
All right, there we go. So I'm going to mute my computer and talk through my cell phone. But yeah, so we met this little German girl. We did an interview with her that should be going up soon. We've got a whole bunch of interviews on the hypocrisy that'll be going up soon. Asking people, so how did you get here? Right? Air travel's so bad. How did you get here? Oh well, no comment. So we've got a lot of that. We've got interviews with a lot of population control nuts that our video editor is going to be turning into one video. And then, if you want to play the Russia collusion video, I think it was really interesting because, again, we talked a little bit about the Russia collusion. And one of the things we did was try to ask people about this. So we asked the Climate Action Network people who were there. It seemed like their assigned task was to demonize the United States. One of the things they did every day was a skit called Fossil of the Day Award. And that was supposed to be awards for the countries that were doing the best at being the worst. And every single one that we saw, the United States won first place. And actually, one of the days that we went there, the United States won first, second, and third place. Right? So we thought that was interesting. So it caused us to look into this more. We did ask these guys if they knew they were being funded by Russia to demonize American energy and if they had any ethical qualms about that. Obviously, they didn't want to talk about it. And then we went to go ask the Russians. And if we can play the clip, then you guys can see the reaction that the Russian delegation had to our question. They pretended to be very amused, but you can tell from the body language and the awkwardness that they were not amused. But can we play that video clip real quick?
It's rolling now.
Oh, the climate change denier? Oh, okay. This guy's a climate change denier. Nobody talks about it.
So we're at the COP25, and after watching the United States be demonized by a group called the Climate Action Network, the U.S. government actually got first, second, and third place Fossil of the Day awards for being the best at being the worst, we decided to do a little digging. What we found out was that this Climate Action Network, their largest source of funds, according to the Heartland Institute, is the Sea Change Foundation. Did a little more digging, and we found out that the Sea Change Foundation had been taking money through a shell corporation in Bermuda called Klein Limited. Turns out the shell corporation was taking money from Putin cronies and Russian energy interests. And according to the congressional report, the reason why, and this money was going to American green groups and European environmental groups, and the reason Congress said this was going on was to keep American oil in the ground so that Russia could continue exporting oil and keeping Europe dependent on Russian energy. On June 29, 2018, Congressman Lamar Smith and Congressman Randy Weber sent a letter to U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. They wrote, entities connected to the Russian government are using a shell company registered in Bermuda, Klein Limited, to funnel tens of millions of dollars to a U.S.-based 501c3 private foundation, the Sea Change Foundation. This money appears to move in the form of anonymous donations. Sea Change then passes the money originating in Russia to various U.S. 501c3 organizations such as the Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters Education Fund, and others. These funds are dispersed as grants that will be used to execute a political agenda driven by Russian entities. Got that, folks? This list also includes the Climate Action Network. So we went over to the Climate Action Network. They were again today demonizing the United States. America got first place again for being the worst country in the world. So we went to go ask whether Russian money was funding the demonization of American energy for the benefit of Russia. Hey guys, I did some research and I found out that the Climate Action Network is funded by the Sea Change Foundation. Congress did an investigation and they found out that this was funded by Russian energy interests. I'm curious, does anybody have a comment? Is Russian energy funding this whole demonstration? No comment? Any comment?
Hey, we're about to take a photo.
Is Russian energy funding this action? He doesn't want anybody to talk to me because I've got a serious question.
Oh, the climate change denier? Oh, okay. This guy's a climate change denier. Nobody talks about it.
I'm curious, is Russian money funding the demonization of the United States here?
The demonization?
We just got first place at being the worst, right? And you're demonizing the United States.
I have no idea what you're talking about, and I'm not really sure this is the right place for this conversation.
I can send you the report from the U.S. Congress.
Hey, bye-bye.
So obviously no comment from the Climate Action Network. Disappointing, but that was expected. We figure probably those guys have no idea. They're being played as dupes, just like most of the people at this conference, it seems. So we are going to go try to ask the Russians about this funding for Klein Limited going to the Sea Change Foundation and then going to environmental groups in the United States. My name's Alex Newman. I'm with the New American Magazine.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
We're looking at this Climate Action Network. It's been receiving funding from the Sea Change Foundation, which we learned was getting money from the Kremlin going through a shell corporation in Bermuda called Klein Limited. The U.S. Congress said this in a report. And so we're just wondering, is there some kind of quid pro quo or anything like that going on?
If we do not, how to say, the U.S. Congress is not our headquarters, so you should address U.S. Congress rather than anybody else to comment their words.
Okay.
I cannot comment and I can't speak for U.S. Congress. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, but you don't think it's true that the Kremlin was sending money to environmental groups in America? Well, very good. Well, that's what Congress said in the report, so that's why I asked. Congress probably thinks that's funny too. Well, sir, thank you very much. We'll try to come back by later, huh? Nice to meet you. Have a good day. Thank you. So that was pretty awkward and apparently pretty funny if you're Russian. But we still don't know whether the Russians or the Climate Action Network are willing to discuss this. We haven't found anybody yet who's been willing to give us a serious comment. We will keep looking, and as we get updates, we'll bring them to you. I'm Alex Newman with The New American. Go to thenewamerican.com for more. Thanks for watching, and God bless.
All right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Hey, Alex, we had this discussion a while back, but the UN actually did a report on the 500 most polluted cities in the world. And guess how many of them were in the United States?
My guess would be none.
You got it right on, buddy. There wasn't one in the United States. There were over 200 in communist China. And yet somehow we're the villain of world pollution, according to the COP25 conference.
Yeah, and it really shows you the idiocy of this whole thing, right? What are the countries with the cleanest environments anywhere in the world? Well, they're the freest countries, right? The richest, most free market oriented, most Christian countries in the world. The United States, Switzerland, Canada, Australia, right? These are the countries that have by far the cleanest environments. These are the countries that also have a free market system and at least some tenuous connection to biblical principles. So if these UN fanatics were actually interested in cleaning up the environment, they'd say, let's look at the best countries in terms of the environment and the worst countries in terms of the environment. I wanted to ask Michael Wadley this. He's talking about we need to get rid of the Swedes because the Swedes consume so much. If you've been to Sweden, Sweden has a very pristine natural environment. It's endless forests and clean rivers. You can go for a hike and just drink out of the rivers that you find. It's a very, very good, clean environment. And then you go to communist countries, former Soviet Union, Cuba, right? You go to Uzbekistan, talk about an environmental wasteland. And what do you find? You find environmental atrocities everywhere, right? So if these people were really interested in helping the environment, they say, hey, I guess we need free markets for the whole world. I guess we need freedom for the whole world. We need prosperity, right? Because countries that are prosperous have the resources to clean up the environment and make sure it stays clean. What do they say? They say, no, we need more central planning to clean up the environment. Right? Go look at North Korea. Right? You take North Korea as an example of environmental stewardship. Give me a break. So again, the cult leaders who are leading this cult of destruction don't even believe the lies themselves. And I think that's absolutely clear. And I think it's an important point that needs to be made over and over and over again. The cult leaders don't believe it, that the lies are for the useful idiots, not for the cult leaders.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, you were both there when, I guess, Debbie, you were there when Al Gore spoke. Were you there when John Kerry was going through his routine?
We sure were.
We were both there, and if you listen closely to the video, you'll hear somebody whistling. That would be me. I forget exactly what he said, but I think he said something like, we're the only country in the world with a climate denier for a head of government. And of course, that's not even true, but I whistled, and yeah, so right.
Yeah,
but so many lies. Go ahead,
yeah,
David.
he was saying, okay, so the first week at the conference, another free food and drink situation. I went into an area where they were with a friend of ours named Wolfgang Mueller, and we should actually talk about the Heartland Institute event, Alex, but that happened on December 3rd. But so Wolfgang and I saw free food and free wine being delivered or about ready to be handed out. And that's when you know you need to go inside the panel discussion, because the priority of food and beverage goes to those people inside these panel discussions. So Wolfgang and I went inside this panel discussion and at COP25, and I'm sitting there listening to this guy talk about unions. He's clearly from the United States. And so I'm like, wait a minute, I kind of like what this guy is saying. He's talking about the unions. I'm not, I have my issues with the unions, mostly that, they're controlling and they're really pushing this agenda along in many ways, this Agenda 21 agenda. But he started talking about all the job losses, union job losses with the solar panels. And not only the job losses with most of the jobs that come with green energy are like solar panel installers. I think the average wage is like $38,000 for a solar panel installer, which is most of the green jobs when it comes with solar and the solar industry, as I just mentioned. He said, so his report, and they came out with this incredible report. We've got a copy of it. I hope Alex is going to write something about it. But he talked about how the average job right now in the oil industry and the mining and the coal industry, by the way, Canada was also part of this panel discussion, was the average income was like $78,000. And his point to the audience was, here we talk about how these green new jobs are shovel ready and they're good jobs. And he's like, that is absolutely not true. And I'm like, holy moly, this is a panel discussion at the United Nations COP25. I like this guy. So anyway, the truth is that there will be, I don't remember how many tens of thousands of jobs lost. And the wages, he said, he said, if you want to live in an apartment, be a single man, not have a family, maybe you're married. He said, then okay. But what they're telling you about these green new jobs are absolutely a lie. And so, I think there's an opportunity for groups to come together. And one of those being the union with us to talk about, to really share with the public out there the real truth behind, COP25 and the Paris Agreement and Agenda 21. There's so much opportunity. Dan, I kind of forget your question. Sorry.
No, that's you're following an excellent path here, because the bottom line is they're selling us a false paradigm. These green energy jobs, or most of them, are low-paying jobs. And frankly, under the Obama administration, most of those jobs were being offshored anyway, weren't they?
Yeah. And this guy, he admitted he was an Obama voter. He admitted, not that it's a bad, wrong thing. I don't want to make it sound like that. But he said, he's a Democrat. And I'm like, man, see, there's so many places we can come together. There really are. Food is another area we can come together and say, wait a minute, this whole thing is not about lots of food. It's about diminished food, because you know what? We really do need a warming earth if we want more food and we want to feed the world. We need, food thrives in CO2. Food thrives in warmer weather. So anyway.
Well, and Debbie, isn't the truth, and I want you and Alex to talk about this, but isn't the truth, according to Willie Soon and a lot of other scientists, that we're actually in a cooling period right now, and a little global warming would be a good thing?
I'll let Alex address that one.
Absolutely. A little bit of global warming would be a fantastic thing. It was warmer about 1,000 years ago. It's called the medieval warm period, and pretty much any honest scientist will acknowledge this. And if they don't, it just proves that they're either idiots or dishonest, because there's physical evidence of this all over the world. Right? You can go to Greenland, and you can see where the Vikings used to have farms. They could farm crops, and they could raise animals there that would be inconceivable because it's so cold in Greenland. And what happened when it was warmer back then? Well, we had an explosion of civilization. Humanity was much better off. Lifespans increased. People were able to explore. People didn't have to struggle as much for survival. And of course, cold is far more deadly than heat, right? Lots and lots of people die from cold every year. Cold is a serious problem. And so if the world were to get a little warmer, it would actually be a very, very good thing. And the climate alarmists, some of them know this too. They know, even if they believe the hoax that CO2 is pollution and all that, they know that there are benefits from CO2. They never want to talk about them. And they know that there would be enormous benefits of a warmer world, but they never want to talk about them. And the reason why, again, is very, very simple. And there was a meme going around that I think just so perfectly explains all of this. And it was a picture of a communist Chinese flag, and it said, hey, guess what? There's no climate protests in China. That's because they don't need them. China's already communist. It was just so perfect. So they have to conceal the truth. They have to whip up Westerners and free nations into a frenzy. And all of it involves ignoring the scientific realities, like the fact that a warmer world would be better. And a lot of the scientists, Debbie mentioned the Climate Reality Conference, and I do think it's important that we give a nod to them. And they do this almost every year at these climate summits. It's a coalition of environmental groups with a more free market-oriented perspective, with a little bit more of a realistic perspective than the tyrants and the criminals and the mass murderers and the gangsters who run the UN and the member governments. They get together and they host kind of alternative conferences. At the conference that I met Debbie at, the COP, or was it 21 or something, in Paris, in France, where they came up with the Paris Agreement. They had several that were really phenomenal. This year at Madrid, they had the Climate Reality Conference, where they brought in Dr. Will Happer. We mentioned that he accused these people of being a destructive environmental cult that was going to kill millions. Various two comments, and they flew in scientists from around the world. You had scientists from Latin America, you had scientists from Europe.
Christopher Monckton was there.
Yeah, Lord Monckton was there. Yep, Will Happer, Douglas Pollock of Chile, Naomi Zeift was there as a child. Since we all apparently need to listen to the children, well, here's one. Nobody wanted to listen to her, obviously. But, the reality is there are plenty of scientists who know these things, who recognize these things, and all the climate summits, they have these types of people who show up in the city and try to present this. And if, they said there was a record number of journalists at this COP25, more journalists than have ever been to any UN climate summit. And that may be true. You'd think if there was actually a search for truth, which is what journalism is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be confrontational. It's supposed to be about the pursuit for truth. It's supposed to be about asking hard questions. All these people claim, they really deified science. They've turned it into an idol in the strangest way. They say science commands that we do this. Science demands that we do this. Science has instructed us, as if science were some kind of God with a little g that must be obeyed and that we must bow down and worship it. You'd think that if we're deifying science, some of these journalists, some of these governments might say, hey, science is so important, let's go hear what these scientists have to say. I mean, Will Happer, a super prestigious scientist, he's held a very senior post in the federal government, most recently Trump's climate advisor, serving on the National Security Council. You'd think some of them might have been interested in this. Well, they weren't, right? I think two stories, maybe three, came out in the media about this wonderful conference, this Climate Reality Conference. One was in Breitbart. One was in Clean Technica, which is a global warming rag. And they were just making fun of them. And why are they so uninterested in the science? Why are they so uninterested in other opinions? And I think the answer is obvious. And, we've tried, Dan, at these summits to get the UN IPCC to talk to us. We tried last year in Poland. We interviewed a lot of scientists. I've interviewed a lot of scientists who've resigned from the IPCC saying the whole thing was a fraud. And so I wrote to the IPCC. We called the IPCC. We even went to their booth and said, can we please talk to one of your people on camera so they can explain to us why all these idiots who don't believe your theory are wrong. It should be a really easy thing to do. Just, come on and just tell us why they're all wrong. Never respond. Never. They don't even respond back and tell us to go, pound sand. They just ignore us. And I think the reason why is obvious. They know that if they were put into a serious interview with serious questions from their fellow scientists, they would have nothing to say. Right? All they have to do instead is just go on with these friendly softball interviews and say, oh, the deniers are evil and they hate science, and they never get challenged. And so, we should have a discussion on the science. I think at this point, the science is absolutely overwhelmingly clear. The hypothesis is wrong. Even for non-scientists, this should be obvious. One of the things that we did at the New American years ago, and many people have since picked up our theme. Not all of them have given us credit, but that's okay. We're not interested in credit. But we went back and we did the hard research, and we went back and said, what are all the falsifiable predictions that these climate alarmists have made? So we started in the late 1970s when this climate hysteria really began. Back then it was, of course, global cooling all the way into the 80s. What are the predictions that they made that could be falsified? If they said something is going to happen in X number of years or something is going to happen by the year 2000, things that we could actually show, yes, it happened or no, it didn't happen. And we compiled, I think, a collection of about 15 very specific predictions that they made. In every single case, they were wrong. And more often than not, they were exactly the opposite, right? To give you some examples, Al Gore stood up in Copenhagen in 2009. I was there when this happened. I was there with my colleague, Bill Jasper. And they said, Al Gore said, within 4 or 5 years, the Arctic ice cap, scientists say, is going to be totally melted. It's going to be totally gone. And so 4 or 5 years came, and we looked, and we said, oh, my goodness, the ice cap is actually 50% larger than it was when Al Gore, the idiot, made those predictions. So, what does that tell you? That he was wrong. And all the media breathlessly reported his predictions. Right? There was hundreds of headlines about how Al Gore said the Arctic ice cap was going to melt, and it was a climate emergency, and we needed action right now. And yet, when the time came and we could actually see whether his predictions had come true, there wasn't a single media story about it. And there's so many examples just like this. I encourage people to go back and read them from our articles. The most recent one we did was climate alarmists have been wrong about virtually everything. Another one was the UN said that by 2010, there would be something like 60 million climate refugees fleeing for their lives from climate change-induced disasters. And they even provided a handy map. We pulled it right off the UN's website. They showed where these climate refugees were going to come from. Well, somebody did a little bit of analysis, and they found out that every single one of those areas that was supposed to be mass-producing climate refugees by the year 2010 had actually increased quite significantly in population by 2010. Not only did they not produce a single climate refugee, they were growing faster than almost any other place on the planet. So again, the UN could not have been more wrong. And you don't need to have a PhD in environmental sciences to see that these maniacs have been wrong about everything. So, we should have a discussion about the science. I think it's a worthwhile discussion to have. But very clearly, I think self-evidently, the other side is not actually interested in the science. They're interested in the political science of how do we manipulate enough people to buy into this agenda that we can impose these policies that we want under whatever pretext on humanity. And that's what we're dealing with.
Well, they're doing it under the, I'm sorry, Dan, but, now it's the economic, look at Venezuela and look at what they're doing with the economics. They're using it to move populations. Sorry, Dan.
Well, I was going to mention, Alex, and you're aware of this, you've used this quote yourself, but Dr. Ottmar Edenhofer, who is the lead author of the IPCC report on climate change that really jump-started, this whole process of the UN promoting climate change nonsense. He said openly, and this is paraphrasing slightly, but it's pretty close. He said, we have to forget the illusion that climate change is about environmentalism, or that this is about environmentalism. It's not about environmentalism anymore. It's about redistribution of wealth. And that's exactly what they're doing.
And policy, which is why Al Gore says we have to have the political will. It's not about the environment. It's about politics now. And that's, they admitted it. I wanted to, you guys reminded me, you asked a question, Dan, about John Kerry. Did we see John Kerry? And I got into the tangent of the union workers. John Kerry, when we were listening to him, and, by the way, you would think he would command a huge audience. He spoke on the very same stage that Michael Wadley, who Alex talked about earlier, the depopulation director, spoke on. So it was a good stage. It was a big stage. It was a stage right in the front, like when you go through the TSA type security that the UN puts you through. And then you show them your badge and they've got a scanner and your picture comes up. And if you're not accepted into the conference, a big red square comes around it and you got to go, do whatever to get yourself accepted into the conference. But the stage right when you walk in is the one where this depopulationist spoke, and then John Kerry spoke. And what John Kerry was saying were flat out lies. And that's why Alex was kind of laughing too. You hear him laughing in the video. He's not only insulting the United States, but he's saying that, all these green new jobs that are going to happen, and that solar is now cheaper and there's, it's now commanding. But he talked about, I believe he talked about Germany. I may be mixing up, and how Germany is a success when it comes to green energy. And if you talk to somebody like Wolfgang Mueller, who spoke at the Climate Reality Conference on December 3rd in Madrid, he would tell you, no. The green energy is failing in Germany. It's so expensive. Only the rich can afford this solar and wind. And we all know, if we put 2 and 2 together, we all know that the sun doesn't shine in a particular place 365, 7 days, 24/7, right? And wind isn't always blowing in a particular space. So we know that this renewable energy that they are pushing, solar and wind are the primary for, and especially for places like California, solar and wind are going to be, and places like Park City, in the United States, many states are pushing by the year 2040, 2050, 100% renewable energy. Mostly they're talking about wind and solar. And so, to hear these puppets, these global elitists talk about wind and solar and all the jobs that, it's just, it's criminal. It's a lie. And I'm hoping Alex can talk about your interview, Alex, with the United States Congress or with the United States delegation, and what you were told. With this as an aside, that when Dr. Will Happer was at the Climate Reality Conference in Madrid on December 3rd, he talked about what it was like to work within the Trump administration, but moreover, what it was like to work within the federal government. And this is going to, I think, explain a lot. He says, when there's an administration and an administration change, you have the UBs and the weebies. The UBs are the people who come under a new administration, and the UBs are you be gone, we be here. So in other words, the deep state, which Alex has written extensively about, the deep state is so embedded in the federal government that what Dr. Will Happer described to us, which to me was so doom and gloom and daunting, is that these guys are permanent. The same, and what all they do from administration to administration is jockey for a job. So it doesn't matter if they believe in global warming or not. They're jockeying for this job that gives them privileges, awesome income, healthcare, and all these things that come up with being part of the deep state in the federal government. And
I've got a question here from somebody in our Discord there, asking about, do you know anything about the Obama wind energy company in Spain that went bankrupt, or anybody know about that? Alex or Debbie?
I heard of this company, and apparently it took down a lot of taxpayer resources with it. And actually, just before we started the interview today, I was reading up on some of Spain's green energy policies, because there really was a kind of a hilarious string of events that led up to the Spanish COP25. And what I found, actually, there was a study done by an economist there. They found that for every green job that the Spanish government created through tax, subsidies and tax-funded subsidies, giving money basically to people for these green jobs, they actually destroyed 2.2 productive jobs. So each fake, green job costs you 2.2 real jobs that actually produce wealth, that actually produce value, that enable the government to fund all these stupid green jobs. So I think Spain proved before many other countries did that these green energy policies, that these green job policies are actually just ridiculous frauds. And, Ben Jones, who was Obama's green job czar, I think that was really revealing, too, because this is a guy who had openly and publicly admitted on multiple occasions that he was an actual communist. In fact, he was part of a Maoist group. How convenient that Obama would appoint him as the green jobs czar. But we've seen this all over the world. It really is a scam to loot taxpayers and enrich cronies. We saw, for example, Solyndra. $500 million from the taxpayer, then it goes belly up. Obama's cronies end up with all the money, and the taxpayers end up footing the bill. And we see this even with some of the elitist investors who claim to be so concerned about climate change. That guy out in California, what's his name now? Steyer? I think it's Steyer, who was, green jobs, green energy #1 man investor. Even while he was demanding all this green nonsense in America, he was investing in coal-fired power plants in China. So clearly, again, the cult leaders don't believe the lies that they're marketing to the public. This is a scam to enrich themselves. But, speaking of this, I wanted to touch briefly. I know we're almost out of time here. The parade of hilarious things that happened leading up to the COP25. So first it was supposed to be held in Brazil. And that was where it was originally scheduled to be held. And then Tropical Trump got elected down there, Jair Bolsonaro. Like Trump, he said this whole thing is a giant hoax. His foreign minister actually called it he called the climate alarmism a Marxist plot to dismantle Western civilization and build up communist China. Right, just exactly like Trump pointed out, which is right on the money. So they moved it from Brazil. The Brazilians said they weren't going to host this idiotic thing anymore, so they decided to move it over to Chile. Thinking, hey, probably it'll be nice to do it in the summer, so maybe there'll be a little bit of heat and we'll have a good time, and nobody will laugh about how it's snowing at our global warming conference. So they decided to do it in Chile. Anyways, Chile had very recently imposed these climate policies on Chile that caused prices of energy and transportation to skyrocket. And what happened? People went out in the streets and started rioting and marching and demonstrating. And, eventually it got hijacked by communists and they started burning down train stations and things. But it was originally the climate policies adopted by the Chilean government that caused the spark that led to this uprising, which forced them to move it over to Spain. And Spain, of course, is the neighbor of France. Well, when the French government tried to implement the Paris Agreement in France, even the left-wing French people rebelled, right? Who could forget the yellow vest, the gilet jaune? They said, hey, we're not going to pay that kind of crazy money for fuel. I mean, we're already, broke. What do you mean we have to pay 60 cents more for every liter of fuel? That's crazy. So they went out and rioted and protested and all the rest of it. So everywhere that these stupid policies have been tried, they have not improved the environment, but they have led to massive unrest. And you can be sure that will continue as governments continue trying to impose this stuff.
And if you're at COP25, you would have people say, oh, look at even the youth saying something that happened. There were a lot of the all-seeing eyes at this conference. And what it meant to the youth was, one, we're watching you. Remember, Al Gore said that, he would create a monitoring system run by the children in that Agenda 21 children's book. But for these kids, they also identified it with Chile because the law enforcement was shooting rubber bullets and a couple of the protesters went blind. So that was kind of a theme at COP25 as well. Mm-hmm. But we know it as, the all-seeing eye. And so anyway, but what you heard, you didn't hear that story that Alex just told you. What you heard at the conference was, no, it's an oppressive government and they need more green legislation and we need more, renewable energy. you didn't hear the truth at this conference. You didn't hear that story out in the media. It kind of got lost, somewhere in the shuffle with the media. They didn't, talk about, well, the reason that there was protest was because these people are being oppressed by green legislation, the costly legislation. Anyway.
Well, something that I want you guys to get into before we completely run out of time, and that is the fact that this universal carbon tax, which was supposed to be one of the things they were going to try to accomplish with this conference, fell flat on its face. Maybe you guys can talk about how that ended up the way it did.
Yeah, so that was their big goal. They had several big goals for this going into it, and they were talking about it. They wanted more global governance. They wanted to finalize the rules for the global carbon market under the Paris Agreement, where basically humanity is supposed to pay for emitting the gas that we exhale, CO2. And they did fall flat on their face this time. And that's why there was so much anger and hatred against Donald Trump, against the Republican Party, against the American voter. It's because this charade requires a lot of money, right? One of the linchpins of their plan was what they called the Green Climate Fund. I call it the Green Climate Slush Fund. And this was supposed to be, and they reiterated again at this one, that they needed $100 billion per year to basically redistribute from the poor and the middle class in the Western world to the kleptocrats who have enslaved and impoverished the people of the third world. And when Trump said we're not paying anymore, other governments started saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't pay anymore either. Like Australia was like, yeah, I don't think so. And, the U.S. is by far the biggest economy in the world. We are basically the piggy bank that funds all this. And so when they didn't have the bribe money to pay off all the third world kleptocrats, suddenly it became much, much more difficult to make a deal. Right? The bribe money is kind of the oil that oils the whole machine. And when the bribe money dried up, all they could do was just gnash their teeth and scream and holler and demonize Trump and demonize America and say that we're evil and that we have to pay anyway. And you can tell how extreme they're getting now, Dan. There was a professor of international relations from Denmark, from the University of Copenhagen, who said that this climate crisis is now so serious that the UN ought to declare it a threat to international peace and security, which would purport to authorize UN military force against any government that refuses to play along with this. So they're really getting unhinged now. They did not achieve their goals at this summit. Right now, it seems like, and from my conversations with the people in the U.S. delegation, it seems like now everybody's just in a kind of wait-and-see mode. They're hoping and praying with every fiber of their being. They opened the 2012 Climate Summit with a prayer to Ixchel, Mayan goddess of cannibalism, war, and human sacrifice. It's a true story. So they're praying and praying and praying that Trump will be removed from office so that they can get this show back on the road by, if not next year, then the year after that. And that's where they are right now. They did not make much progress at this one, but they're not giving up. And in fact, they're getting more and more unhinged. So.
Well, that's why we need to stay active. We need to stay involved and be on board with this. Alex, you write for the New American magazine. I want to give you a chance to do a plug for the New American and some of the things you're involved in. And then I'd like to finish up with Debbie giving you a chance to talk about some of the programs you're working with.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Dan. So the New American is a phenomenal magazine. They're the ones who sent us over to Madrid. They're the ones who have sent me to all these climate summits so that I can bring back the truth to the American people. It is, in my opinion, the best magazine, not just in the United States, but in the world. There's no other magazine where you're going to get the undiluted truth like that. So I hope people will go subscribe, at least for the online, daily headlines. That's free. Just go to thenewamerican.com, give your email address there. We'll send you either daily or weekly. And
by the way, Alex, I just got mine in the mail.
Oh, fantastic.
I literally did. I just got mine in the mail here.
That's awesome. And so we'll have a cover story on the COP25 coming out, I believe, the first issue in February. You get 2 per month mailed to your doorstep if you're a subscriber. I hope people will subscribe. It is subscribers and advertisers who make possible the kind of reporting that we do. And so, thanks to the listeners. And thank you, Dan, for having me. Thank you, Debbie, for all the amazing stuff that you do. And I'll hand it over.
Okay, well, thank you. Debbie, one last shot for you to talk about some of the things you're involved with.
Yeah, hey, Thumper, do we have that Agenda 21 challenge link available that we could share with everyone?
I'll get that link out there for you. Yeah, we're rolling into the next show here, so
yeah. Okay. Well,
I'll get the link out for everyone.
Okay. Real quickly, what I'm working with is the young people. I've got 3 superstars out of 10. I'm trying to expand. I'm doing a test with young people about getting involved in Agenda 21, learning about Agenda 21, and taking the information back to their communities to expose Agenda 21 in their communities. I have 3 young people from the age of 11 to 14. Dr. Willie Soon's son is one of them. I have raised some money to give them a scholarship in July 2020, where they'll come forward at Camp Constitution with their successes in their community over the year. I have 2 young guys who created a podcast to talk about Agenda 21. You guys, these are 11 and 12-year-olds talking about Agenda 21 in their communities. I have Dr. Willie Soon, Benjamin Soon, working on an extensive list of all the failed past, present, and future predictions that these climate alarmists are coming up with. So if you go to the link that Thumper is going to bring up, the Agenda 21 Challenge, please donate $1, $10, $100. All the money goes to these kids, and this is the first group of kids that we're giving the scholarship opportunity to expose Agenda 21. There it is, right there, the Agenda 21 Challenge. Please go there. Donate money, encourage these young people. And if you have some young people who want to get involved in this challenge, please get them in touch with me. We have weekly Zoom calls every Monday night. These guys, these 3 young guys get on the phone with me and we do plans. We wrote a letter to Greta Thunberg. It got exposure. We started a podcast. I mean, there's so much more to do within the next year, but we need more people talking about Agenda 21 and exposing it. And where we need to really go to work is the young people.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Thank you for all you do. And Patrick, we ran a little over here. I want to pass this on to Patrick Howley and his program. But thank you, Debbie, and we'll talk to you soon.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thanks, guys. Happy New Year. God bless everybody.
God bless.
And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution. Now an enemy from within would enslave us all again and deprive us of our rights in the Constitution. Restore the Republic. Wake up, it's time to understand. Restore the Republic.